Adaptation is the progressive loss of receptor sensitivity as stimulation is maintained. Adaptation can also record action potentials. The frequencies of these action potentials tend to decrease. Tonic receptors is a receptor in which the frequency of action potentials declines slowly or not at all as stimulation is maintained. Phasic receptors are a receptor in which the frequency of action potentials drops rapidly as stimulation is maintained. Adaptation means that there is a progressive shift in neural activity away from accurate portrayal of physical events. Sensory systems emphasize change in stimuli because changes are more likely to be significant for survival. It also prevents the nervous system from becoming overwhelmed by stimuli that offer little news in the world. The basis of adaptation includes both neural and non-neural events. Our success as a species demands that our sensory systems accumulate the important changes of stimuli. In many sensory systems, accessory structures can reduce the level of input in the sensory input. In a second form of information control, neural connections descend from the brain to lower stations in the sensory pathway. Top-down processes are processes in which higher-order cognitive processes control lower-order systems, often reflecting conscious control. Sensory information travels from the sensory surface to the highest levels of the brain, and each sensory system has its own distinctive pathway. Sensory pathway is a chain of neural connections from sensory receptor cells to the cortex, which each station in the pathway accomplishes a basic aspect of information processing. The thalamus are the brain regions at the top of the brainstem that trade information with their cortex. The receptive field is the stimulus region and features that affect the activity of a cell in the sensory system. To determine the receptor field, it is required to record the neuron's electrical responses in a variety of stimuli to see what different size and shape and quality of stimulation that activates them. There are several different regions of the cortex that receive information about the sense. You have the primary sensory cortex, which is the region of the cortex that receives most of the information about that modality from the thalamus or directly from the secondary sensory neurons. The secondary sensory cortex is the cortical region receiving direct projections from primary sensory cortex. The primary somatosensory cortex, S1, is the gyrus just posterior to the central sulcus where sensory receptors on the body surface are mapped. And then the secondary somatosensory cortex is the region of the cortex that receives direct projections from primary somatosensory cortex. Attention is a state or condition of selective awareness or perceptual receptivity by which specific stimuli are selected for enhanced processing. This is sometimes referred to as a top-down process, as mentioned before, and is also very recognized in the posterior parietal lobe. The cingulate cortex is a region of medial cerebral cortex that lies dorsal to the corpus callosum. The use of one sensory system influences perception derived from another sensory system. Association areas do not represent exclusively a single modality but show a mixture of inputs from different modalities, therefore being polymodal, which involves several modalities. Skin is considered the largest organ in the human body. The layers of the skin are as follows: epidermis, the outermost layer; dermis, the middle layer; and hypodermis, the innermost layer of the skin. When it comes to the skin, it is very tactile, relating to touch, of sensing anything that touches your skin. The Pacinian corpuscles are found in the hypodermis. The Meissner's corpuscles are a skin receptor cell type that detects light touch. Merkel's discs are a skin receptor cell that detects fine touch, which has an inhibitory sound. Now, the Meissner's corpuscles are more numerous than Merkel discs. Piezo2 is a receptor protein in touch receptors that responds to mechanical stretch by opening channels to let cations into depolarize the cell. And then the final skin touch receptor is Ruffini's ending, which is a skin receptor cell type that detects stretching of the skin. The 4 skin receptors send their axons to the spinal cord, entering the dorsal horn and turn upward. The dorsal column system is a somatosensory system that delivers most touch stimuli via the dorsal columns of the spinal white matter. The dorsal column nuclei is a collection of neurons in the medulla that receives somatosensory information via the dorsal columns of the spinal cord, which the outputs of the thalamus are directed to the primary somatosensory cortex. And the dermatomes is a strip of skin innervated by a particular spinal nerve, which is difficult to determine the pattern of these dermatomes.